Hello and welcome to everyone. I'm truly excited to have you here to another episode of the Human Factor podcast in HSE. I am looking truly forward to having a conversation today with Roger New. He's a very talented and skilled and experienced HSE professional, and I can't wait to hear his story of how he actually got into HSE and where he is seeing the biggest change that are shifting right now in HSE. But Roger New, how are you today?
I'm fine, Bjorn. Thank you. Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me on this podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And before we press play, you were kind enough to say that the certificates that you have in the background, you didn't hang them for this podcast, but it made me very happy that you actually have them there hanging in the office. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Great. So whereabouts are you in the world right now?
Sarasota, Florida.
That's wonderful. I bet it's probably a lot warmer and nicer in the weather than it is here right now in the north of Denmark.
I'm sure that it is.
Beautiful. Okay, let's get started. Can you start out by telling how did you actually end up in HSE? How did you start your career in this type of profession?
Sure. Well, I'm a retired police officer, and I was offered a job in the oil and gas in the Midwest. So I moved out there, went to work in oil and gas, and saw that there was an opportunity. Actually, the president of the company came to me and asked me if I would be interested in filling a regional safety position with the company that they had open, so we talked about it, and I saw it as an opportunity and took the opportunity, and I've been in HSE ever since. So that's the story.
That's how it all started. So what was your first experience of getting into the work of HSE? What was the first experience that you had there?
Well, we had a high number of injuries, nipped fingers, busted thumbs, things of that nature from working at the wellhead. And so I was asked to come in and reduce those injuries. And I've always believed that there are three things that are missing in every injury investigation. There's three things that were missing that caused that injury. And those three things are leadership, communication, and mental focus.
All right. So why do you think that the president came to you? What did he see in you that would inspire him to offer you a position within HSE?
Well, I'd been with the company. By that time, I'd been with the company about 3 months, and there were some recommendations made by some of the vice presidents in the area that I was working. They knew that they needed a safety representative because they were getting to the point where they were starting to lose some customers because of the safety rating. So exactly how I came into his radar, I'm not sure, but I did.
All right, that's quite interesting. So whenever it is that we operate in oil and gas, there's always a higher standard of safety than there are in other areas of business in general. But when you went into the oil and gas fields and you were there for 3 months before you started to kind of move into HSE, what did you see in those 3 months that made you realize it could be interesting to actually go down and try to improve the safety standards of the company?
Well, the biggest part was I saw the lack of leadership in the field. You've got a supervisor running a crew, and a lot of times that supervisor is younger than some of the members of his crew. And a lot of times that supervisor, his only experience is what he's gained with that company. Um, there's a lot of cowboys in the oil in the upstream, or I should say downstream oil and gas. Um, and there's not a lot of mental focus. The focus is get out there and get the job done and move on to the next job. And with safety, you have to have more planning. You have to have more focus in the job and more focus on the people than that.
All right. And how many years ago is this that you started?
2007 is when I started in oil and gas.
All right.
Now, I'm also retired military. I did 10 years active duty, and then I did another 11 years in the Florida Guard while I was on the police department as well. So, um, leadership and safety is something that was embedded in me in both careers as a police officer and as a soldier.
I can only imagine there's a lot of people who come from a service background or serving in the military. Do you think that that was an advantage for you when you got into this line of work?
Yeah, they go together. I mean, you're taught, especially if you're in a senior position, as I was, you're taught to take care of your people, look out for your people. Safety is a big factor in everything you do, and that's in both military and police. In the police, which kind of goes along with the whole mental focus thing, and the police training, you're taught to operate in color codes. Uh, for instance, green. When you're in the green mode, you're at home. You're safe in your castle. Uh, when you're riding around on a patrol car, you're in yellow. You're always cautiously looking around, watching your surroundings. Your head's on a swivel. When you're in red mode, you are in the thick of it. And if you ever go to black mode, that's because you didn't properly know how to go through yellow and red. Most of the time you go to black mode straight from green, if that makes sense to you.
Completely. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing. So, when you first got it, it's quite interesting because you mentioned these three factors that are in place whenever it is that we see something goes side or something goes bad. So either it's lack of leadership, lack of communication, or lack of mental focus. So when did you realize this? When was the first time that you kind of saw and came to the conclusion? So in the vast majority of cases, it's always one of these three that are kind of standing in the way.
Well, I can't put an exact date on it. I can say that it was many years ago. It was when I was a police officer. And I was a field training officer for a good period of time as a police officer. So I trained officers that were just coming onto the department. And so I watched officer safety. I watched how an officer would respond to a situation. And you carry with you from day to day. I mean, and we're all guilty of this. We're all victims of mental focus. When you come to work every single day, you come to work in a different mindset. Uh, Sometimes you're in a good mood. Sometimes you're in a bad mood. Sometimes there's something that's stressing you out from home. Well, that all plays into your focus on the task at hand. So whether you're a police officer, whether you're a manufacturing production worker, if your mind is not in the game, if your mind is not on what you're doing, you're adding to your own risk. And I would see this on the street as a police officer. I'd watch officers that were taking risks that they shouldn't be taking, and we all call that complacency. And complacency is something that affects every one of us as well.
Definitely, definitely. So whenever it is that we go into a new line of career, we always have those kind of light bulb moments where something that really sticks with us for the rest of our career. So Do you remember what the first thing that made a big impression on you when you became responsible for HSE?
Well, I care about people, and I think I saw an opportunity to number one, reduce the number of incidents that we were having that were getting people hurt, and and I was successful at that. And to kind of carry this on, Bjorn, I was a regional manager, and then I was asked to be the director of that company for safety. The safety director quit and went to work somewhere else, and I was called by the same president and said, "Hey, I want you to be my director." Um, for those people that are familiar in the U.S. with the TRIR, which is the total recordable incident rate, that is what has a big impact on whether you work when you're in the service industry, whether you work for and have a customer base or not. Our TRIR, when I went to become the director, was in the fours, and I got it down to 1.98, and that was below the industry standard for that industry. And then we were bought out by a company called Archer, which is a Norwegian drilling company. And then the president of Archer North America asked me to be the safety director for all of North America. So I did that job for a couple of years. And then the bottom fell out of oil prices, and there was sell off, and then I moved on.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. It is really, really fascinating to have you on here to share your story. And I really would like to go a bit more into details of the different steps, and kind of, because every time you change position in an organization, the responsibility kind of changes, and the activities that you need to do also shift in characters. So
Sure.
if we start off with the first job that you had, what were your main tasks when you went to work?
Main tasks then were conducting the annual training and traveling out within the region, traveling out to the job sites, to the wellheads, and doing safety site audits, and meeting with our customers and making sure that everything was satisfactory to them from a safety perspective. A lot of travel involved, a lot of windshield time, and it really what was really important there was developing a relationship with our workers in the field. Uh, there's an old saying that I learned in the military a long time ago. I don't care what you know until I know that you care. So I had to show those people that I cared about their safety, and I'd worked with them for, like I said, 90 days in the field as a hand before becoming a safety manager. So they got a feel for me then. They knew that I would work. I wasn't afraid to get dirty. I think that's a problem with or can be a problem with a lot of safety people, is a lot of times they are operating as a safety person over things that they don't really understand because they didn't get their hands dirty doing the job first. I was fortunate enough to have 90 days of upfront experience before I became a safety person in the oil and gas field.
All right. And you mentioned that the numbers went down quite significant. When did you guys start to see the reduction in the numbers? Was it already in the first role you had, or was it when you kind of made the next step up in the organization?
No, it started in the first role, because one of the things that we started out doing, one of the things that I suggested, was we didn't really have a good documented on the job training program. And I got with the other managers and the VPs in my area and said, let's do a check sheet for each one of our job tasks. We had coil tubing, we had snubbing, nitrogen. So we developed a on-the-job training work task to where those people could be trained, incoming people could be trained off of that check sheet, and that left nothing to chance. We knew that if we're checking them off on that sheet, that they had been trained on all aspects of that job. When you run by the seat of your pants trying to train people, there's always something that you're going to miss.
Yeah, definitely. And do you see, when you look back on it, do you see this as the biggest, that was the thing that kind of shift the needle in going into a positive direction?
Yeah. There's all of that wasn't without some pain too. I mean, I'm pretty direct, and there were things that I wanted to see happen, and so there was some pushback from some of the managers, and I had to go in and sit with them individually and convince them of what I was trying to do. Some people thought that I was trying to be a ladder climber, and that wasn't the case at all. I was trying to do things that was going to work for us there, and so everybody questions your motives when you bring in new ideas, but it eventually worked.
And I think that could be quite interesting to share for other people who might be not as experienced as you in the field of HSE, because that is what we see whenever we ask in different communities, what's your biggest challenge? It's always getting the buy-in from the managers. So how did you start that process whenever you met the resistance of people not wanting to kind of give the buy-in to the new initiatives? What were your approach to actually making them aware that this was the way that it was going to be moving forward?
Well, you have to first try to understand them and understand what their motives are. And then you have to work on being understood. They then have to understand where you're coming from. And where I was coming from was keeping our people safe, number one. Number two, making ourselves more marketable by having a sound safety program that was going to eliminate injuries and make us stand out above our competitors. And but first and foremost was keeping the employees safe. And with that, the managers that I worked with and the people that I worked for, they bought in. They believed that what I was doing was the right thing, and they were willing to give it a try.
All right. Was there any of them that was giving more resistance than others? Like, were there some of them where you needed to kind of have the conversation over and over again?
Oh yes, I had one particular vice president that he and I up to the day that we parted ways. We didn't care for each other. He just he never saw things from my perspective, and I never saw things from his. We were cordial and professional with each other, as you should be, but there was always the tension there. We didn't see eye to eye, and you're going to have that.
Yeah, of course. All right. So after this, you kind of took a step up into the organization. How would you say that your everyday task changed?
Well, I went from managing one particular area to managing, from a safety perspective, to managing the whole company. So then I had different other states involved, training for all of the sites involved. I also had DOT, so DOT reported to me. We had a lot of big trucks on the road, so we had the safety involved in that. So I had DOT, safety, and training. All those three departments is what I was over at that time.
All right.
And the first one I didn't have DOT. I had safety and training, but no DOT. DOT with any transportation company, DOT is a big portion of compliance.
Definitely. And looking back upon this, what was the hardest thing? Because now you went from kind of being the direct responsible person for the safety on site in a region to now kind of being one step back from the everyday activities and needed to kind of promote the safety through other HSE specialists. How did that change for you? Did you see that change going on, or did it just come natural to you?
No, I could see it. The reason I was asked to be the director for the company at the time before we sold was because my area had the best safety rating of all the other areas within our company. And so when I became the director of the company, then I had the opportunity to go to those areas and help get them to where they needed to be, and help coach them into a safer program. And that worked. That's where we got down to the 1.98 TRIR, and then I was asked by the company that bought us to be the safety director, and that was after a couple of years. I was asked to be the safety director for all of North America for that company.
And what was the thing that you saw when you went to a different region where they didn't have the same numbers as you? What were the thing that the HSE person responsible for that area didn't do?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, there's lack of experience in HSE. You got a lot of people that are working in safety that are just learning it as they go along, and you've got people in safety that don't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up for what's right and voice their opinion as well. They don't want to be fired or so they will make a suggestion, and if they're told no off the bat, they move away and they let it go. That's one thing I never did. Is if I believed in what I was doing, I stayed on task, and I worked always to convince those that were naysayers that this is the right thing to do. But I'd say the biggest thing, Bjorn, would be experience and then senior leadership buy-in. You've got to have a safety manager or a safety representative that you believe in, because if you don't believe in your safety representative, you're not going to buy into what he or she is wanting to do.
Definitely not. So this is where it becomes extremely interesting for me, right? So how do you convince a naysayer, someone who is just constantly saying no to whatever you suggest, and how do you actually get them on your side?
Well, you convince them to give you a chance to try your method. And when your method works, that's your automatic buy-in. Now, if your method doesn't work, then you're going back to the drawing board. I was fortunate enough that my methods were working, and it was carrying us to a better place. And I think for the one vice president that I talked about that didn't like me, I think that was more personality than anything. I think, he and I we just didn't click. But we still work together.
Obviously, there is, as you mentioned, you need to have a certain professional standards that even if there's not the right chemistry or you don't want to do barbecues together, you still need to get the job done.
Absolutely.
So, I completely understand and appreciate that. So now it becomes fascinating. So you went even further up the ladder, right? So even further away from everyday activities. I imagine that it became more numbers on your desk, if you're doing good or not. So how was that for you? Because when you have been and actually been dirty in the field, to then trying to educate people, to then moving to where you took it, because you took it quite far in your career, and then just kind of being the guy who goes to meeting, looks at the stats, or am I wrong? Was the everyday activity differently? I need to ask.
Well, I think that's part of the problem with some places with safety, is that becomes that the director becomes the meeting attender and looking at numbers, but he or she is no longer looking at people or looking at processes. That didn't change for me. I still got out into the field. I went out and would meet with my area managers on a regular basis and go to their job sites with them, and we'd look at things together. When you have focus on a job, people know that, we've got the director of North America out here looking. People are more on their toes, and it gives you the chance to interact with those people. And when you see something that's unsafe, you can coach and share an idea with them, and that's given you your chance to reach out and touch the people that are actually out doing the work. So I always went to the field.
I thought you might, so I just wanted to make sure, because I think that you're right. It can be very distant from what's actually going on, and I'm not sure if it's too revealing, but the time set for this podcast was also set so that you were done during the everyday walk. So you're still kind of engaged in what's going on at the lowest practical level.
Well, that's true, and I've been now with this company for a little over a year, and when I came here, we had in 2021 we had 6 recordables for the year. This year we've had 1, and we're hoping to finish this year out with just 1. And again, to talk about TRIR, we were at almost a 4. And now we're at a 0.65. So the engagement with people makes a big difference.
So that was going to be my question. How on earth did you do that?
Well, and I didn't do it. The team did it. This is not Roger that did that. It's a team effort. But I think I was partially the catalyst that got out there and got people involved, got people engaged and talking. And again, it goes back to that, I don't care what you know until I know that you care. If I know you care about me, you've got my attention. And we're that way as well. If we're talking to somebody that we know doesn't care about us, we're half listening. But if we know that they're a genuine person and that they care about what's going on, we're more openly involved with them.
For sure, definitely. So now you have been in HSE since 2007, and so with a bit of math in my head, that's roughly 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So have you seen any kind of changes that has happened over that period of time?
Well, there's a lot more technology that's come about with safety. That's for sure. As far as people goes, I haven't seen a lot of change, and that's probably where job stability rests. Is that that people are people, and so if everybody all of a sudden became safe, and then there'd be no reason to have a safety manager, right? But people are people. I don't think that's going to change. What has to change is we have to keep pushing the message out there. It's kind of like a preacher. You have to keep pushing the message out there about being safe, doing the right thing, even if nobody's watching, being your brother's keeper. And I think one of the 2 other things that I think, Bjorn, are big when it comes to mental focus is you also have to give people a picture of what's wrong. And what I mean by that is hazard identification. Hazard identification and near-miss reporting. Near-miss reporting is something that everybody talks about it, just like hazard identification. Everybody talks about it, but there's very little training in it. And so one of the things that we do here with hazard ID and near miss is every near miss, it gets cataloged in PowerPoint with pictures, And when we catalog it, we print it out and we put it on all of our boards on the plant floor so that people can see what the near miss was. There's a description there. And then I also talk about it with the groups, and we have a safety committee that we talk about all of them with, and we pushed near miss reporting. We want people to report near misses. We want you to first, if you see it, own it, fix it, but take a picture of it when you first see it and share it with us so that we can catalog it and we can get it on the board so that people have a vision of what the problem was. That way, when they see it again, it rings the bell.
Definitely. And that you say so many great things, so we can take it in so many different directions, but it is quite interesting if we go with kind of the mental focus and identifying hazards. Do you then actually work on people how to identify their own mental focus before they go on a task? Is that something that's part of your training program?
Yeah, one of the things with our safety committee that I did when I first got here is I told the safety committee that if they're good enough to volunteer for this committee, I want to provide them safety training at every single meeting, every step. I want there to be something that they take away that's going to benefit not only them at work but at home as well. So we talk about all these aspects. We've talked about mental focus. We've talked about how you come to work in a different mindset. If you're mad at your wife or your husband, that's what's on your mind. It's not what you're involved in a task at the time. To include driving to work. You know, if you look around now, and I'm sure that it's no different where you're at, but if you look around as you're driving down the road, you are going to see 9, if not 10 out of 10 people on their cell phone texting while they're driving. Well, that's an example of a lack of mental focus. They're focused on something that can wait. And, you see it all the time. Somebody gets killed or seriously injured in a car accident because they were texting and driving. Those, you've got to use those pictures to show everybody else. You know, the smart person is the person that learns from somebody else's mistake.
Definitely. And that is unfortunately a quite hard lesson to learn, even for people who see and experience the accidents. So there is a big job and a big task to be done there just on the texting. All right. So I really would like for you to kind of, where do you actually see the HSE going in the future? What do you think is going to be the number one thing that's going to determine if you succeed or not in HSE?
You know, that's a really hard question to answer. It's a good question, but it's a hard question. I think the one thing that's going to determine whether somebody succeeds or not is what is their true goal, what is their internal goal, and 2 is what are they being given the opportunity to satisfy that goal or to satisfy the company's needs. You know, you've got a lot of senior company leadership in all companies, in all industries, that don't really have a good understanding of what a good safety person is or what a safety person should be looking at. You know, a lot of safety people are hired based on personality. A lot of safety people are hired based on credentials. Sometimes people are hired based on a credential, but are never given the opportunity to put that credential to work. So I think to answer your question, it really has to be a melding of both of those, that the person has to be focused and know what his goals are to achieve or her goals, and the company they're working for has to give them the opportunity to try and succeed at it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. another fellow countryman of yours phrased it in a way that he learned early in his career that you need to make a seat at the table, because if you don't manage to actually get the management team or kind of the middle management even on board to what you're trying to achieve, it's not going to succeed regardless of how skilled an HSE person you are.
And that's a very good point. You definitely have to be able to get a seat at the table. And the only way you're going to be able to get that seat at the table is if you are determined, and if you have to make yourself known that you're bringing, again, that you care and that you're bringing the good things to the table.
Definitely. So before we end the podcast, I want to ask you, if you were to advise someone coming into this sector, where would you set the focus, and where do you think that the biggest gains is that to set focus on leadership, communication, or mental focus?
Well, as somebody newly coming in to work in HSE, it would be their mental focus would be first and foremost, because they've got to determine what their path is, and so part of that mental focus is figuring out, again, seeking to understand the company that they're working for. And if they can understand the company and what the goals of the company are, then they take their side of the game and they try to make that work for the company. So focus is definitely first and foremost. Leadership and communications, that goes hand in hand with focus as well. But leadership, you're going to be given the opportunity to show your leadership at some point in time. And leadership is one of those things that you're not born with. You're not a natural born leader, but some people have the abilities, but they have to be honed, and you have to learn how to be a good leader. Communications is, you can talk all day about communications. There's a different way, 100 different ways to send a message, and there's 100 different ways to understand that message that's sent.
Definitely. And I think that's part of why it makes it so interesting, right? So some of the other guests here on the podcast has told the story of kind of when they started 30 years ago, it was about writing the perfect policy and procedure, whereas as today, they just look at how people are reacting to that policy and procedure. And then they can kind of try to edit it so that it fits and fixes the behavior that they actually want to achieve. So that is quite fascinating. And I agree with you. We could talk about communication all day long. Roger, thank you so much for actually wanting to be a guest here on the podcast. Is there anything that I actually lack asking you that you think that could be relevant to know for other HSE people?
The only thing I would add is, there was an old police saying that 10% of the people cause 90% of the problems, and that's true. There's also a saying that 90% of the people are good people and want to do the right things. If you as a safety person learn your people and show them you care, they want to do the right things. You just have to have faith in them, and they'll have faith in you.
Thank you, Roger, so much for that strong message. And I think that's where we're going to end the podcast. So once again, thank you so much for taking and investing your time in actually sharing your great story and experience in the world of HSE.
Well, thank you, Bjorn. It was a pleasure.
Beautiful. All right. So that ends the podcast. How was that?
I thought it was good. You tell me. You're the one that was interviewing me.
But I think it was really great. I was more referring to your feeling of being on the podcast. How was that?
Oh, I liked it. I liked it. It was fun.
Ah, that's great. And to be fairly honest, there are so many ways that we could have gone down. And I've already now, I want to ask if we can do a second one at a later stage, because I think it's quite interesting. There is a lot more depth in some of the scenarios that you're touching upon that could be very, very interesting to dive into at some point.
Sure, I'd be interested.
Ah, that's great. All right. So that's covering the podcast as it is. I'm curious to know what kind of initiatives that you're looking to implement in the new year.
Well, we're looking at we've got three initiatives that we're continuing to push because right now we're still building on our culture. So if you're familiar with the DuPont Bradley model on culture, we're trying to get into the interdependent phase. So what we're continuing to push for 2023 is hazard identification, near miss reporting, and slips, trips, falls. Slips, trips, falls in America is always on OSHA's top 10. And not only is it on OSHA's top 10, it's always number one. It's been number one for years running. And we've had slips, trips, and falls here in this year. Fortunately, they didn't cause injury and didn't create a recordable, but we've had them. So it's a big thing for us to stay focused on. And then from a management perspective, I'm also focused on getting the managers here to continue to engage and be on the floor around the people and engage with the people. We've seen tremendous changes in the people on the floor just by being out there and showing them that we're human too and we care about them.
Definitely. All right. And before I was preparing for our podcast, I took the liberty at looking upon your reflection video that you shared when you did your exam on the HSE Mental Focus Specialist certification. And you just mentioned there that you might at some point would be looking at doing some more training within this area. Is that something that you're looking into as it is right now?
Yeah. If you're familiar with OSHA, OSHA has a 10 and 30 hour. 10 hours for an employee, 30 hours for a supervisor or a manager. I'm certified to do the 10 and 30 hour training, and I'm actually going to be going within the first quarter of 2023 up to our Milford, Connecticut office, or Milford, Delaware office, I'm sorry, and do a 30-hour course for them, which I'm going to include a bunch of the mental focus stuff in, and the Daniel Kahneman theories. And Daniel Kahneman is really what brought me to you, is reading his book and then running across your information on LinkedIn. It was great. I think you're onto something. I really do. I think that what you're doing is a good thing for safety if we could just get everybody to engage with it.
Thank you so much. That's deeply appreciated that you feel that way, because part of what we do is we try, as to the best of our ability, to kind of make the merger of dovetailing into something that's already existing. And I'm so thrilled, and I can also say quite proud of the work that's being done from the people who are in the executive group, because there's so much generosity and sharing amongst these people that are really, even for experienced HSE, seeing them grow to a different level. We're seeing their organizations being rated at some of the top contractors that they have never been before. Seeing people getting really nice promotions and stuff like that. And I just want to ask if it's at all relevant for you, because I think that you could be a really great asset to be part of the executive group. Is there anything that, have you considered that at all since you visited it the last time?
I haven't, because I mean, it's just not something that we've talked about. But I'm always open to ideas and moving forward with things.
All right. And would you like to see some materials on what's going on in the group? Can I send you something?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. I'll be more than happy to do that, because, yeah, as I said, I really think that your personality and experience in combination with the next level of training that's there, I think that could be extremely strong for the results that you're looking to create in 2023. So I would be more than happy to share some more information on that.
Well, I would appreciate that, Bjorn. I really would.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to make a nice email for you and then send it over to you with including of some walkover of what's entailed in the entire process, and then we can take the dialogue from there.
Okay. Now, what do you do with this podcast now?
So what I do with this podcast now is that I do two things. So first of all, I send it to a guy. He edited it and cleans up the sound a little bit. And then we put a beginning and an end to it. But what we also do is that we try to look for something that is very inspiring for other HSE people. And if you allow me, I would like to use this video recording of when you're saying those statements so that I can share that on LinkedIn, but only with your permission.
Sure, you have my permission.
Thank you so much. And then we have also, my team has pushed me to do a YouTube channel. So also, again, with your permission, we would like to share the entire video episodes on the YouTube channel.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Roger. I'm looking so much forward to our future communication.
Well, I am too, Bjorn. I am too. I appreciate you reaching out to me on this.
You're more than welcome. All right. I'm going to let you go. And once again, thank you so much for taking your valuable time and investing it in me and the HSE community.
Well, thank you. And if I don't talk to you again between now and Christmas, have a Merry Christmas, you and your family.
Thank you. And the same to you. Speak soon, Roger. Bye.